With the preseason coming to a hurry in the end here for the Denver Broncos, are some potential intriguing roster cuts and or trades coming, specifically in one particular room on offense? How many wide receivers will Sean Payton ultimately be able to keep on this roster to balance the necessary depth that they'll need for the 2025 season? And are Dre Greenlaw and Alex Singleton fully ready to play together alongside each other for the first time in an NFL regular season? All things to come on today's rundown, but I want to begin with a conversation about the wide receiver room that I find at a minimum intriguing, because there is a realm of possibility that exists where a prominent and popular name that we got to see a decent amount last year could be on the trade block after just one season here in Denver. And I am talking about the former 7th-round pick, Devon Vele. I have said multiple times on this show and on the air for Denver Sports 104 through the Fan that I see almost no way that the Denver Broncos don't carry 6 wide receivers on their 53-man roster going into the season. And those 6 are all very easy to name, in my opinion. You have Courtland Sutton, your wide receiver 1 from last year. You have Marvin Mims, your wide receiver 2 from last year. You have Devon Vele, who was just behind Marvin Mims in terms of production and yardage as a Broncos wide receiver. Then you have Troy Franklin, who is emerging in a significant way and could be on the verge of a breakout level season at the wide receiver position compared to where he was a year ago. And then you have Pat Bryant, the 3rd-round pick that you just drafted. Pretty fair to say he's probably going to make the roster. And then there's that pesky Trent Sherfield Sr. at number 6, the player who they signed in free agency, longtime veteran wide receiver who was going to be, on a special team sense, replacing the efforts of core 4 special teamer Tremon Smith, but was not going to be significantly labeled early on as a major contributor in the wide receiver room. Well, all he's done in training camp and throughout a couple of preseason games against the 49ers and the Cardinals is look pretty damn good, to the degree where I think I would not be surprised at all if he caught north of 20 passes in this upcoming 2025 season. And that's factoring in the mouths to feed that already exist with all those wide receivers I just mentioned, Evan Ingram, the Joker, and the tight end for this Broncos offense, and then a couple of guys named J.K. Dobbins and R.J. Harvey as well. So I think there's almost no way, and I've been adamant about that I see the Broncos cutting one of those 6 wide receivers and going with 5 into the 2025 season. But if they do decide, if Sean Payton and George Payton put their collective minds together and decide, you know what, we can't spare a 6th wide receiver with the difficult dynamic we have in the running back room, with the talented edge rusher and interior defensive line depth that we've seen emerge with the likes of Jonah Ellis and so many players on that defense who through these first preseason games have shown at least semi-legitimate potential to be contributors in those rooms going into this season, and then the depth they may need to try to fortify and bolster the inside linebacker room, where you have both starting linebackers in Alex Singleton and Dre Greenlaw coming off of significant injuries in prior seasons and injuries of a recurring nature in the preseason of 2025 already. And then Drew Sanders, a key backup, being banged up to a degree that he's going to likely miss the start of the regular season. So there's a lot of calculus that comes into play. And if they decide, they being Sean Payton and George Payton, hey, we can run with 5 wide receivers and no more, then you start to wonder who those 5 are going to be. It's obviously going to be Sutton. It's obviously going to be Mims. It's going to be Troy Franklin because of the way he has come on and the fact that he was a former 4th-round pick from just a year ago. It's going to be Pat Bryant. He's a 3rd-round pick from just a couple of months ago. And it's going to be Trent Sherfield because they just paid him to come in the offseason, and it would make no sense to sacrifice the special teams contributions that he is going to be able to make with the receiving ability that he's flashed for the money that he's making. Well, that leaves your essential wide receiver 3 from last season in Devon Vele as the potential odd man out. And Devon Vele's statistical production in 2024 for a 7th-round pick coming out of college to do in his rookie season, 41 receptions for just under 500 yards and 3 touchdowns, making significant improvements throughout the course of training camp where he's significantly outshined his fellow wide receiver mate in Troy Franklin, who was a much more coveted draft pick at that time, and then continue to just consistently stack days and weeks to make plays, to bring the likes of Zach Bye and others here around the market to point him out on a regular basis. Zach Bye called him one-a-day Valet, right? Like the multivitamin that you got to take every day. He's their Centrum Silver, for lack of a better word. And we may be looking at a situation now, in theory, it has been proposed that if they can only run with 5 and Devon Valet, because of maybe not as significant of special teams contributions or blocking prowess to the likes of a Trent Sherfield, and doesn't have the draft security and status of a Troy Franklin and certainly not a Pat Bryant, if he is going to be somebody that finds themselves the 6th man looking up at the 5 who are going to make the roster, should the Denver Broncos look to trade Devon Valet before cutdown day and at least salvage some form of asset versus letting him walk or cutting him for nothing? And my answer, I guess, would be if that is ultimately what they decide to do, then yes. And you hope that you can get a better than, maybe a 7th or a 6th round pick for Devon Valet. It'll probably end up being some sort of pick swap in the later rounds. So the value is not going to be great, but it's better than nothing. I just don't know if that's a smart decision for the Broncos to make. Devon Valet is a receiver whose body type physically profiles well as an outside boundary wide receiver. He was kind of drafted in that Tim Patrick mold to be that replacement. And Tim Patrick, as we've discussed on previous shows, was a contributing wide receiver for the Broncos who at times looked like maybe the best wide receiver that they had in that room, as Courtland Sutton took a little bit of time to come back from some of his lower body injuries. And you get about 500 yards and 3 touchdowns on 41 receptions from a guy like Devon Valet, who was your top 3 in terms of production receivers behind Sutton and Mims. And I have also said that Troy Franklin and Pat Bryant, to me, look like technically or presumably projecting as the future for the Denver Broncos. But that doesn't mean that I look at what I got from Devon Valet last year if I'm Sean Payton and George Payton, and I'm going out of my way to wiggle around and send that out the door. I know that in a perfect world, you've got 5 guys and you can run with those 5. But man, I said yesterday that 6 wide receivers means a lot more to me than 4 running backs. And if you have to run with JK, RJ, and Jaleel, or JK, RJ, and Tyler Bidet, which is what I kind of envisioned, then that to me, letting go of Jaleel McLaughlin and or Tyler Bidet doesn't hurt my roster as much through my eyes if I'm playing armchair GM and head coach as potentially letting go of a pass-catching weapon for Bo Nix that showed out pretty significantly for a former 7th-round pick. Statistically speaking, what he was able to do among other 7th-round picks at the wide receiver position in recent NFL history was significant. And everything has to be centered and focused around the continued development of Bo Nix. He is the potential future franchise quarterback for this team. And anything that may potentially stunt, stumble, hinder, or slow that kind of development and progression automatically has me just pulling back on the reins just a hair before I'm ready to just make a decision of that nature. So all in all, in theory, the possibility of Devon Valet being on the trade block and conceptually speaking, getting something, a late round pick or a pick swap or whatever it may be, as opposed to nothing if you're only going to carry 5 wide receivers and Valet kind of finds himself as the odd man out. I guess I understand the logic behind that. But I go back to his production and the way beyond the numbers in the box score, the way that he looked at wide receiver in training camp last year and in the regular season in 2024, to me showed the promise of a guy that he may be one of the better bargains on your roster right now for payment to production when you put those two side by side. And I think there was probably other areas of this roster, of which there's going to be tough cuts in multiple other rooms, where you could find that without sacrificing a wide receiver core in a room where we don't even know who the wide receiver 2 is, and we're already looking at shaving off somebody that I thought going into the 2025 offseason could be that guy. And maybe it's Troy Franklin. Maybe it ends up being Marvin Mims, who they've lined up a lot on the boundary. But I am not going out of my way in any kind of hurry or rush to trade Devon Vele and take somebody out of that room that I think it could be and should be a pretty productive Denver Bronco. There are 2 Denver Broncos who are going to be playing alongside each other in the regular season for the first time this year. And their success or failure alongside each other could have a pretty significant say in how this Broncos defense is evaluated and looked at and performs on a week-to-week basis in the 2025 season. I am obviously talking about Alex Singleton and Dre Greenlaw, the 2 inside linebackers, one returning from a near season-long injury in Alex Singleton, who went down in week 3 and played the entire game on a torn ACL before missing the remainder of the season. And Dre Greenlaw, the former 49er, who comes over despite significant efforts from Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch to try to keep him in San Francisco. He leaves, and he said earlier in this preseason and the training camp process that he felt like he was more wanted here than he had felt in some time, which impacted emotions that he felt as a former foster kid in the system, and truly feels like Denver is the place where he is meant to and supposed to be. And so when Dre Greenlaw is on the field and healthy, he is one of the best on-ball physical linebackers in the NFL. He is a true sideline-to-sideline player that strikes fear, not just apprehension or game planning of attention, strikes fear into opposing offenses for what he is able to bring from a physicality standpoint, from a coverage standpoint, and an attitude standpoint to his defense. And we certainly saw what San Francisco looked like during that Super Bowl when he went out with one of the more bizarre injuries in recent memory, popping his Achilles, jumping on the sideline of the game. And then you have Alex Singleton, who is kind of that definition of the fly under the radar, grit and grind player who is always a tackling machine and somebody that makes their way to various parts of the fields, honestly plays with a similar style to Dre Greenlaw, even though it doesn't get quite maybe the ceiling or the notoriety that a guy like Greenlaw has been able to amass when healthy and on the field. Well, both of these guys are going to be coming back from significant injuries in their previous seasons, and then with Alex Singleton's thumb and Dre Greenlaw's quad that he pulled up on while covering J.K. Dobbins at the very end of July during a practice drill, they are going to have to play alongside each other and microwave some chemistry and development. And there is a legitimate question as to whether or not they're fully ready and prepared to do that. There is a connectivity and a synergistic nature to the inside linebacker position, playing alongside each other and knowing and understanding each other's movements. And Sean Payton is very aware of that. When asked about the inside linebacker dynamic and the way that they need to get reps together, Sean Payton said, I think when you take into consideration that one of them is coming in new to this defense, there are some variables that need to be worked out. I think all these snaps, they all factor in when they're out on the field together. So we have this week, we have Saturday, and then obviously a few days next week. Then we're leading into the game, and there's going to be that growth at the start of the season. So Sean Payton's kind of laying the runway out for you right there, that these two, because of individual injuries and the way that the offseason has unfolded, have not had a lot of time to truly work and connect and grow alongside each other in what could be a linchpin point for this Broncos defense, because we all feel confident with Zach Allen and the interior defensive line and JFM and Malcolm Roach that they are going to be able to perform at a high level. We all have confidence in Nick Bonito, who is a top 10 finisher in Defensive Player of the Year. He was third in the NFL in sacks. He has a significant payday, very likely coming his way as soon as the end of this coming week. And Jonathan Cooper being a very capable and formidable pass rusher on the opposite side of him. We feel great about that front. We also feel great about the secondary, where the reigning defensive player of the year in Patrick Surtain, alongside a fully healthy now and emerging Riley Moss, the new addition of Jahdae Barron, who could play inside or outside, which definitely impacts the future and the usefulness of a guy like Jaquan McMillan, who is, as a slot nickel corner, somebody that gets overlooked a little bit, I think, when it comes to the coverage aspect and maybe some of the positive contributions, but a damn good corner in his own right. So you feel pretty good about the front and you feel pretty good about the back, but that middle has historically been a place where the Broncos have found to be a pain point, and tight ends for opposing offenses, as well as running backs and receivers over the middle, have taken advantage of that pain point time and time again for a good amount of years, basically off and on since Brandon Marshall and Danny Trevathan walked out the door post-Super Bowl. But I do think that could very well change in 2025. I think on paper, based on the limited sample that we've been able to see in training camp, combined with what we know about each player individually coming into this season, this combination of Dre Greenlaw and Alex Singleton has the potential to, in a legitimate sense, be the best inside linebacker tandem that the Broncos have had since Danny Trevathan and Brandon Marshall, who we all remember from getting closer to a decade ago now. But that's not going to come right away, because this has not been due to injury and precaution. That is not going to come right away because of the delayed nature with which they've been able to truly get out on the field and get meaningful reps together. And we may see some of that this upcoming weekend when Sean returns to New Orleans to face the Saints. We may see, as some of the other starters will play, that Dre Greenlaw and Alex Singleton will get a couple of snaps together. But even if they don't, this on-ramping 2 weeks where you play a lowly but hopefully on the come-up Tennessee Titans team and an Indianapolis Colts team that just named Daniel Jones their starter, signaling a move away from the former 4th overall pick in Anthony Richardson, those 2 weeks are going to be critical for Alex Singleton and Dre Greenlaw to be able to get real live reps, start building that callus, and more importantly, building that chemistry and that connectivity together, and hopefully slamming the door on any kind of weak point or pain point or hole in this Broncos defense. Because let's not forget, without Singleton and without a healthy Riley Moss and with PJ Locke dealing with injuries, this Broncos defense went from a clearly formidable and one of the more vaunted units in the NFL to being 32nd in total defense in the month of December in 2024. So we've seen where if and when pain points are exploited and identified, how that can quickly change the narrative and the efficacy of this team and this defense in the NFL. It looked significantly different on the back half of the season than it did compared to the first, even after Riley Moss rushed his way back to the field against the Bengals. And if Alex Singleton and Dre Greenlaw can find that chemistry and that groove together, and health does not become the factor that limits them in 2025 the way it limited them in 2024 and in some cases beyond, then this Broncos defense gets a massive lift from one player in Dre Greenlaw, who is a significant upgrade from a talent perspective, and one player in Alex Singleton, who has been a mainstay and sort of a glue guy on that defense, who plays with a similar nose for the football, ball hawking, aggressive style of play, something that continues to form an identity for this Broncos defense, which has also been missing since basically the no-fly zone and that Super Bowl 50 defense walked out the door. There's going to be so much to keep tabs on as we continue to march toward the end of the 2025 preseason. We've got one game left for Sean to go back to his ex-girlfriend's crib and see if he can't get his starting offense into a rhythm the way that we haven't really seen it outside of joint practices this season. And then for Vance Joseph's unit, that connectivity and that fluidness that we saw due to injuries was missing at times last season. And that all encompasses the depth conversation and the roster manipulation that is going to happen in the very near future, which could include some tough cuts in the running back room, in the wide receiver room, or potential trades in the wide receiver room, like we discussed today, the cornerback room, pass rush and interior defensive line. Almost everywhere you look on this Denver Broncos roster, there is markedly more noticeable, if not better, depth at a lot of those positions, which creates the champagne problem of Sean Payton's fear that you let a guy go from your 53 here in Denver and he goes on to shine elsewhere. Will there be any candidates to take care of that here in Denver? I'm not sure as of this moment. We've talked about a handful going into today's show, but we will know for certain very, very soon. And that's why you need to stay locked into Denver Sports 104.3 The Fan. Everything going on at DenverSports.com from the likes of Will Peterson and Jake Shapiro and Trent Finnegan, Anilo Pirro, James Marilat, Cecil Lammy, Andrew Mason on Orange and Blue today, and all of our social shows here on Denver Sports 104.3 The Fans channels like The Rundown, Denver Sports Daily, and the just unbelievable wealth of content and information and news and opinions and analysis that we have here for you with football season just around the corner. We'll catch you all again tomorrow at noon.